Good morning, 7th grade students. Good to see you today. We are continuing with our reading of Refugee, and we are on page 87. Our last chapter was Isabel, who now appears to be stranded after leaving Cuba because the engine of their boat just sputtered and stopped. But now we're with Mahmoud in Kilis, Turkey, 2015. It's not that long ago, 2015, 5 years ago, 2 days from home. Mahmoud could hear music beyond the fence. It was hard to see for all the people. He stood in a long line with his family, waiting at the border to gain admission into Turkey, near the city of Kilis. Around them were countless more Syrian families, all hoping to be let in. They carried everything they owned with them, sometimes in suitcases and duffel bags, but more often stuffed into pillowcases and trash bags. The men wore jeans and t-shirts and tracksuits. The women wore dresses and abayas and hijabs. The children looked like miniature versions of them and acted like miniature adults too. There was very little crying and whining, and none of the kids were playing. They had all walked too far and seen too much. After leaving the car behind, Mahmoud and his family had followed the map on their phone, skirting cities held by Daesh and the Syrian army and the rebels and the Kurds as best they could. Google Maps told them it would be an 8-hour walk, and they split the journey up by sleeping in a field. It was hot out by day, but it got cold at night. And Mahmoud and his family had left all their extra clothes in the car in their haste to escape. The next morning, they had seen the people, dozens of them, hundreds, refugees, just like Mahmoud and his family, who had left their homes in Syria and were walking north to Turkey to safety. Mahmoud and his family had fallen into step with them and disappeared among their ranks, invisible just as Mahmoud liked it. Together, the shambling throng of refugees was ignored by the American drones and the rebel rocket launchers and the Syrian army tanks and the Russian jets. Mahmoud heard explosions and saw smoke clouds, but no one cared about a few hundred Syrian people leaving the battlefield. And now they were in line with them, all those hundreds of people and thousands more, and they weren't invisible anymore. Turkish guards in light green camo gear with automatic weapons and white surgical masks over their faces walked up and down the line, staring at each of them in turn. Mahmoud felt like he was in trouble. He wanted to look away, but he was worried that might make the guards think he was hiding something. But if he looked right at them, they would notice him, maybe pull him and his family out of line. Mahmoud stared straight ahead at his father's back instead. His father's shirt was stained at the armpits, and with a quick sniff of his own shirt, Mahmoud realized he stank too. They had walked for hours in the hot sun without a bath, without a change of clothes. They looked tired and poor and wretched. If he were a Turkish border guard, he wouldn't have let any of these dirty, squalid people in, himself included. Mahmoud's father kept their papers tucked into his pants under his shirt, along with all of their money, the only other things they owned now besides 2 phones and 2 chargers. When Mahmoud and his family finally got to the front of the line late in the day, Mahmoud's father presented their official documents to the border agent. After what seemed like an eternity of looking over their papers, the border guard finally stapled temporary visas onto their passports and let them through. They were in Turkey. Mahmoud couldn't believe it. Step after step, kilometer after kilometer, he began to think they would never, ever escape Syria. But as relieved as he was, he knew they still had so very far to go. Ahead of them stretched a small city of white canvas tents, their pointed tops staggered like white caps on a choppy sea. There were no trees, no shade, no parks or football fields or rivers, just a sea of tents and a forest of electric poles and wires. Hey, we're in luck, Mahmoud's dad joked. The circus is in town. Mahmoud looked around. There was a main street in the camp, a wide lane where refugees had set up little shops selling phone cards and camp stoves and clothes and things people had brought with them but no longer wanted or needed. It was like a giant rummage sale, and it seemed like everybody in the camp was there. The path was crammed full of Syrians all strolling along like they had nothing else to do and nowhere else to go. All right, Mahmoud's father was saying, a man in the group we walked with gave me the name of a smuggler who can get us from Turkey to Greece. A smuggler, Mom said. Mahmoud didn't like the sound of that either. To him, smuggler meant illegal, and illegal meant dangerous. Dad waved their fears away. It's fine. This is what they do. They get people into the EU. The EU, Mahmoud knew, was the European Union. He also knew they were much more strict about letting people in than Turkey was. Once you were in one of the EU countries, though, like Greece or Hungary or Germany, you could apply for asylum and be granted official refugee status. It was getting there that was the hard part. I've been talking to him on WhatsApp, Dad continued, holding up his phone. It will be expensive, but we can pay. And we'll have to get to Izmir on the Turkish coast. Assuming we stop to sleep every night, that's a 19-day walk. Or it's a 12-hour car ride, nonstop. I'll see if I can find us a bus. Mahmoud and his mother and sister and brother walked the shopping street. People called out to one another in Arabic, and music from radios and TVs filled the air. Other children darted in and out among the adults, laughing and chasing each other into the alleys of tents off the main drag. Mahmoud caught himself smiling. After Aleppo, the near constant gunfire and explosions, punctuated by the oppressive quiet of an entire city trying their hardest not to draw attention to themselves, this place felt alive, even if it was dusty and cramped. Mahmoud saw a cardboard box of used toys at one of the shops and knelt to dig in it while his mother and brother and sister walked on. He sifted through it, hoping, yes, a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. It was the one with the red bandana. The box didn't have any other Ninja Turtles in it, but Waleed would be excited to get it. Mahmoud hoped so, at least. Waleed didn't seem to get excited about much these days. Mahmoud paid 10 Syrian pounds for it, about 5 cents in American money. A car honked behind Mahmoud, and he turned like everybody else. It was an old blue Opel taxi, traveling so slowly Mahmoud could walk faster. It was the only car Mahmoud had seen in the camp, and the crowd parted for it as it drew closer. A Syrian pop song blared from the radio, and young men and women danced and laughed alongside the taxi. As it passed, Mahmoud saw a young couple sitting in the back. The woman was dressed in a white satin dress and veil. It was a marriage procession, Mahmoud realized. Back in Syria, it was a tradition to be escorted to your wedding by a parade of cars to help carry you into your new life. Mahmoud remembered his uncle's wedding before the war. His uncle had worn a tuxedo and his bride had worn a dress of sparkling jewels and a tiara, and they had been escorted by a dozen cars to a party where Mahmoud had eaten a piece of the delicious 7-tiered cake and danced with his mother to a real band. Here, the couple's only escort was a group of rowdy teenage boys running behind the taxi, and their destination was a dirty white tent with whatever food they'd been able to buy in the camp's market. But everyone seemed to be having fun. The old taxi's exhaust pipe made a sound like a gunshot, and everybody ducked instinctively. The smell of happiness and safety was momentarily broken by the unforgettable memories of the chaos they had just escaped. Mahmoud's heart was still racing when someone put a hand on his shoulder and he jumped. It was his dad. Mahmoud, where's your mother? Where are Waleed and Hannah? The father asked. I found us a ride, but we have to leave now. We're going to continue on with a chapter with Joseph on page 93. Somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, 1939, 10 days from home. Joseph followed the small group of kids through the raised doorway onto the bridge of the St. Louis. The bridge was a narrow, curving room that stretched from one side of the ship to the other. Bright sunlight streamed in through 24 windows, offering a panoramic view of the vast blue-green Atlantic and wispy white clouds. Throughout the wood-decked room, there were metal benches with maps and rulers on them, and the walls were dotted with mysterious gauges and meters made of shining brass. There were a number of crewmen on the bridge, some of them wearing blue and white sailor uniforms like the stewards, and 3 more in brass-buttoned blue jackets with gold bands at the cuffs and blue officers' caps with gold trim. One of the regular sailors stood at a spoked steering wheel the size of a truck tire with handles sticking out all around it. It looked like the steering wheels Joseph had seen in paintings of pirate ships, but this one was metal and connected to a big rectangular pedestal. The shortest of the 3 men in fancy uniforms strode over to the group with a big smile on his face. Joseph recognized him from the Shabbat service. "Welcome to the bridge, boys and girls," he said. "I'm Captain Schroeder." The captain shook each of their hands, even though none of them was older than 13. One of the parents on board the ship had arranged for a tour of the bridge and engine room for any children who wanted to attend, and 8 of them had signed up. Ruthie and Evelyn hadn't been interested, but Renata was there along with a few of the other older kids. Captain Schroeder introduced them to his first officer and the other crew on the bridge and showed them what some of the gauges and dials meant. Joseph listened eagerly. "This is the engine control for the St. Louis," Captain Schroeder explained. "When we want to change speed, we grip these handles, slide them all the way forward, and then pull them back to the new setting." He smiled. "I'm not going to change the speed now because we've got the engines set right where we want them." Joseph noticed both handles were set to ahead full. "Are we going full speed because we're racing 2 other ships to Cuba?" Joseph asked. The captain looked surprised and then a little angry. "Where did you hear that we were racing other ships to Cuba?" he asked Joseph. "2 stewards were talking about it the other day," Joseph said, feeling a little nervous. "They said if we don't make it there first, they might not let us in." The captain pursed his lips and glanced meaningfully at his first officer, who looked concerned. The captain turned on a smile again. "We're not in any kind of race," he said, looking from Joseph to the other kids. "We're just making best possible speed because we have calm seas and a following wind. You've nothing to worry about. Now, perhaps Petty Officer Jacques will show you the engine room." As high up as the bridge was on the ship, the engine room was just as far down. After stepping through a steel fryer door that had "crew only" painted on it in big letters, Joseph and the tour group went down the staircase after staircase, and they still weren't to the engine room yet. Below decks was very different from what Joseph was used to above decks. Where everything on A-, B-, and C- decks was airy and comfortable, there were no portholes here, no spacious cabins. The air was damp and smelled of cigarettes and cabbage and sweat. Peeking into the rooms, Joseph could see that the crew quarters below the decks had 2 beds to a room and barely enough space to turn around. The hallways were narrow and the ceilings were low. Petty Officer Jockel had to duck as they went through the doorways. Joseph had never been afraid of tight places before, but the close living conditions made him uneasy. He felt like he was visiting an alien world. The 7 other kids must have felt the same way because they were all silent, even Renata. From down the hall came the sound of men singing, and Petty Officer Jockel slowed. As they got closer, Joseph recognized the tune. It was the Horst Wessel song, the anthem of the Nazi Party. Joseph's skin crawled, and he and the other kids looked at each other nervously. Joseph had heard the Horst Wessel song hundreds of times in the weeks following his father's abduction. It had gone overnight from an obscure song the Nazis sang at rallies to the unofficial national anthem of Germany, and it was frightening. The last time Joseph had heard the song was the day every one of his neighbors had lined the street to salute as Nazi soldiers marched by. Petty Officer Jockel tried to slip the children past the little common room where the crewmen were drinking and singing. But suddenly, someone in the room called out, "Stop! Passengers aren't allowed down here." Jockel froze, and so did Joseph. One of the men got up from the table, a scowl on his face. He was a thick-set man with a bulbous nose, bulldog eyes, bulldog cheeks, and dark, heavy eyebrows. Joseph knew that face from somewhere. Had he been their steward at dinner? Set up their beds one night? No. Joseph remembered. That was the man he had seen in the balcony in the morning of the Shabbat service, the man who had been angry that the portrait of Hitler had been taken down and removed. The man staggered a little, bumping into things as he tried to move through the tight little room. Joseph had seen drunk people leaving pubs in Berlin the same way. "The captain has given these children special permission to visit the engine room," Schindick, Petty Officer Petty Officer Jockle told him. The captain? Shindick said, his voice dripping with disapproval. Even from where Joseph stood, he could smell the alcohol in his breath. Yes, Jockle said, straightening. The captain. On the wall of the common room, Joseph saw a bulletin board with Nazi slogans and headlines from the rabidly anti-Jewish newspaper Der Stunmer pinned to it. He felt a shiver of fear. Jewish rats, Shindick said, sneering at Joseph and the other kids. Many of them looked at their shoes, and even Joseph looked away, trying not to draw the big man's attention. Joseph clenched his fist, and his ears burned hot with frustration, embarrassment, and his helplessness. After a few moments, Shindick staggered back to his seat, and the threat of the captain's rank still wore something, even so far away from the bridge. Petty Officer Jockle hurried the children along, and Shindick and his friends broke into another Nazi song, even louder than before. Joseph heard them sing, "When Jewish blood flows from the knife, things will go much better," before Jockle ushered them down another flight of stairs. Joseph's legs felt weak, and he clung to the railing. He thought they had escaped all this on the St. Louis, but the hatred had followed them even here to the middle of the ocean. With its huge diesel engines and generators and dials and pumps and switches, the engine room should have been fascinating, but Joseph had a hard time getting excited about it. None of the other children were excited either. Not after what had happened with Shindick. The tour ended solemnly, and Petty Officer Jockle returned them to the surface, being careful to take them back by a different route. It was a different world below decks, Joseph thought. A world outside the magic little bubble he and the other Jews lived in above decks on the MS St. Louis. Here, below decks, was the real world. Well, thank you, sixth grade students. We'll stop there and we'll start on page 99 tomorrow and see what is happening with Isabel and her family. Thanks so much. Have a really good day. Take care.